Welcome to HCA Talks Health. I'm Zina Leroux, and as our guest today, we have Elly Dolan. So Elly is a counsellor, and she's got an MA in working therapeutically in nature, and she's also director of a social enterprise. So welcome, Elly. It's lovely to have you.
Thank you for inviting me, Zina. Great to be here.
So please share with us a little bit about yourself. It sounds very interesting what you're up to. So share with us a little bit more about your background and maybe the story that led you to your current work.
Yeah, isn't it interesting when I was thinking about preparing to talk to you today and how kind of, if you let things happen organically, the journey that life takes you on and your career takes you on. So I suppose, my background is in early years and play, and that, playing with children, we're seeing all the developmental stuff that comes on there with them. And that led me to running forest school sessions. And my ideal, Zina, was that I was going to run this lovely little nursery with these tiny little Wellington boots hanging up and everything would be perfect. And somehow that morphed into running alternative education with teenagers, teenage boys who were at risk of exclusion from schools. So completely different demographic to the one I was expecting to work with, but wonderfully rewarding. And the thing that I found working with those boys was that a big gap in their lives was the early years. It was that ability to play and to enjoy space and being free with their bodies in nature. And the difficulties they had were in the confines of the classroom, where they had to sit down and couldn't move and had to concentrate in that way that didn't suit them. And in all honesty, that didn't suit me either. So I didn't like the school in that way. So I had every empathy for them. So that continued for quite a few years, very successfully running this alternative provision with local schools in the North Lincolnshire area. And then, unfortunately, what happened was there was a change in government policy, and the qualifications that we were working with for these young people were taken off the schools and colleges attainment tables, which meant it became very difficult for schools to justify sending these young people to us. Although they could see all the softer outcomes and all the development that went on there, they actually needed cold, hard qualifications for their results. So that kind of died down, and I had a bit of an idea of being a little bit of a sort of Trojan horse situation. If we couldn't send the children to us, then how could I get the staff to understand the methods that we used and take that into the schools? So we then developed into being a training organisation for teachers to be forest school leaders themselves and actually deliver forest school sessions in their own grounds, which was fantastic. And something happened along that journey that I wasn't expecting, was the transformation that happened in the teachers. So, this set off as kind of this idea of like being able to bring this transformational form of education into schools and the benefits it would bring to the children. And what happened over this year-long training with the teachers was deep change within themselves, with their own connection with nature, their own thoughts about the education system, about their profession, and changes in their own personal circumstances as well, in feeling more determined, independent, capable in all sorts of activities within their own personal lives as well. What also started to happen was that the conversations around the campfire really allowed people to settle in to the environment and to disclose some of the distress that they were feeling in a profession that we know is very challenging, very target driven, very narrow curriculum. And these creative people were struggling with that. And the scrutiny as well, I think, that goes on within teaching. So what happened was that some of the teachers that worked with me really did start to have quite an emotional response to working in this way. And many of those sessions became much less about the nuts and bolts of training to be a forest school leader, and much more into that, the restorative benefits of being in nature for the staff themselves. And deep change went on with them within that year. And that's what led me to looking at ways that we could use the social enterprise that I'm a director of, with my 3 colleagues, of how we could look for addressing a gap that we saw, which was we had had a lot of funding for adults who had maybe drug and alcohol misuse, that had long-term unemployment. But what we found really hard was to find somewhere that people who care for others, so the teaching staff, NHS staff, public services, where could we find for them to go that was a restorative space that didn't involve them maybe having to go to their doctor because they didn't feel ready for that, maybe didn't involve them having to go and talk to their boss because they didn't feel ready for that either, but they knew they needed something. They needed a space in which they could, if they wanted to, express that they were unhappy without fear of judgment, especially in a career-driven pathway, which becomes sometimes really hard. There's still so much stigma around any kind of mental distress. So we looked at, to start with, what was happening with social prescribing, because this was a very interesting thing, and that kind of fitted our ethos, in kind of like, let's not look to the medical model necessarily, but let's look at what else we could do to allow people to be in a supportive environment and to self-heal, to find their own path that made them feel better. But as a small social enterprise, we found that as the social prescription situation was starting, it was impossible for us to navigate. We didn't have the infrastructure to be able to deliver anything that was outcomes focused in that way. We couldn't risk not having the cash in to pay for workshop leaders. It just wasn't going to work for us, and it was very complex as well. So we thought, how can we do something that kind of fills that gap locally? So we applied to the National Lottery and were successful in a 3-year bid to start something that we called the ReWild Project. And that project was, people will go, what is it? How can this be? Because basically what we did was to ask folks what they would like to try. And then we would try and find a local provider who could deliver that. So we had the craziest, things asked for. So alpaca walking, birds of prey days, gliding, just things people could do together in a small social group. That they maybe as adults really wanted to try, but didn't have the confidence to go on their own. And join an established group of people. So that was the gap. That was the gap. And it's playful, so going back to that early years stuff, it is playful. What are we doing is we're allowing adults to meet together and play and to feel a little bit fearful sometimes of trying something new. So that really is what the ReWild Project is. My wonderful members, we get together twice yearly and they say all the bizarre things they'd like to do. And my wonderful job is to go out and identify fantastic, talented folks who can deliver those services for them. And the funding allows it to be free at the point of contact, which is absolutely lovely. So there is no charge to be a member of the ReWild gang. And what's happened now, we're into our 6th year. What's happened is that obviously members now know each other. So they're turning up, they are socialising, they feel free to express if they're distressed about anything. But what they're also doing is having this wonderful experience of like overcoming fear and being allowed to be playful, which I think is so important.
It's so interesting how, as you said earlier, it evolved, hey? And it kind of organically evolved, the projects that you were busy with and how you were kind of addressing the gap and the needs that you saw while you were doing that. So there's quite a few things that you said here that's really interesting. But the first thing that comes to mind is just the benefit of being in nature. Right, so just the teachers were in nature, busy with this program, and they experienced the benefits themselves. So tell us more about it. I think most people have an awareness of, it's good for me to be outside and to be in nature. But what exactly is the link? Why is it so good for our mental health to be in nature?
Well, I like to call it magic, but it's not. It's the way, to me, it's the way we're meant to be. Yeah. We've lost some of that connection with nature, and there's a Richard Louv describes it as nature deficit disorder. That disconnect from nature and not being able to move our bodies, to smell the scents, to be aware of all our senses being used, because we are nature. We're not aliens that landed on this planet. We are part of nature, and to be disconnected from it is not good for our well-being, our physical or our mental well-being. And there are things that have been researched around kind of brainwave patterns that change when we're around a campfire. Because if we look at evolutionary psychology, around the campfire was where the cooking was done, where conflict was resolved, where we were warm, where we gathered, where we were kept safe from animals. And that stuff is passed down. If we look at kind of the things that are becoming more to the forefront around things like understanding ancestral trauma, people are talking more and more about and recognising that generational trauma happens. If we think about our well-being, then maybe a good thing is to step backwards and look at what made people feel happier in that time. So I think there's all those sort of things around. That's what we've done, and to distance ourselves from it isn't a good idea.
Yeah.
The key thing that I've found while working with people is a little bit of discomfort really builds community. And many people, the young men that I worked with, certainly didn't like being cold and uncomfortable, but they soon found really creative ways to change that, and they had to work together to make that happen. And the same thing happens with with adults as well, is that we're uncomfortable, so we have to get on with it and find some resilience and community and empathy for other people as well. So taking care of people and being taken care of within the sort of woodland or an outdoor environment is really important as well. So that challenge and slight discomfort, physical discomfort, can really lead to something happening there.
So also maybe finding those solutions, being creative in finding solutions going forward, and maybe working together with others to move forward. Okay,
confidence building as well. Really challenging yourself to do something that you didn't think you could do, and sticking at task and having time to stick at task. Is really important as well.
Yeah, to build that confidence. So something else that you mentioned that I find really interesting, and I think it's maybe time to address that more. So thinking about the school systems, right, and how there isn't always space for play. I think from a very young age, I don't know whether that is the case in your country as well, I guess, but definitely in South Africa we've got that, where from a very young age, kids need to do homework, they need to sit still, there's not a lot of room for play. And you've mentioned a few times now the importance of play, yes, for both children and adults. So tell us a little bit more about what the impact could be of children not being able to play in the early years.
Yeah, it's sadly lacking, and I think with education being so politicized that many people don't understand the importance of play. They're just playing is a phrase that's used all the time. I feel there's very little respect for the early years profession in the UK as well, which is, it's an underpaid, underfunded, unrecognised profession, which has wonderfully talented, creative people that shape the formative years of our children. And in the early years, all those kind of emotional intelligence things are generated and fulfilled, that whole foundation for not just learning, as in like academic learning, which is what everyone's so focused on, but learning how to be a part of society, how to feel that you are useful and valuable. And we know that those are things that make people feel well. So learning to have empathy and understanding and self-control and self-regulation all come from play. Learning how to move your body, how it helps the brain develop, is absolutely essential. And it's sadly lacking when we think that the important thing that children do is the sitting down in the classroom and learning to read and write. And reading and writing is obviously important, but what we do is like, oh, let's let them out to run around a playground for 15 minutes and don't recognise that that actually could be one of the most important parts of the day.
Absolutely, yes. So until what age? I mean, you've mentioned that it's beneficial for adults even, so I guess it never stops, the benefits. It's not just early years, but kind of throughout our lives. So what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, definitely. You know, that something that I think is really difficult for our young people is when they move from kind of that primary school into the senior school, where the focus isn't on being able to move your body. And, you know, sort of things like PE and drama are way down the hierarchy of, and art is way down the hierarchy of scale, you know, with maths and science being up at the top there, which doesn't benefit all children. Some children will benefit and thrive on that, but many don't. And I think that being playful, we should never stop being playful. You know, it's never time to grow up. Let's be more childlike in our lives because it's fun. And that's when we explore and really deeply understand things, because play uses the whole body. And we don't just understand the world by cognitively thinking about things. We have to experience it and feel it deep within ourselves and our whole being to really understand what's going on with ourselves and with other people.
So I want to pause a little bit more at the early years development and how important it is. So just thinking about how those early life or early experiences can shape us in adulthood, right? You said that it impacts the brain in certain ways. Can you make it more practical and maybe share one or two examples with us in terms of how could early experiences shape who we are as adults?
Yeah, I'm thinking about a young man that I work with. So this was when we were looking at very young children, and this child really didn't thrive in the classroom environment at all. So you're trying to teach phonics, all the kind of more structured learning that went on. This child was disruptive and became very unpopular in this class with the other young children, because he was causing difficulties. You know, they were set to task that this is what you got to do. You've got to sit down and learn this. But when we got this child out in the woodlands, wonderfully creative. It turned his coat into a cape, made a broomstick, and just started playing this wonderfully imaginative kind of witches and wizards creative game. And to watch that happen, and all these classmates gravitated towards this child because what he was doing was so exciting. And he had what you could regard as leadership skills out there. And he built relationships in this imaginative play and brought great ideas to this group of his peers who he wasn't getting on with in the classroom. And can you actually just stop for a minute, imagine what it must be like to have to go to school every day and to not feel liked?
Yeah. To
not feel that you were bringing anything to that classroom, to be constantly feeling like you were criticised and you were holding other people back. And, you know, the children would model the teacher who was frustrated with this boy. But out there, that space allowed him to be seen as something different. And that kind of playful relationship between people of any age can change the whole way that they fit in within their community. And fitting in and feeling part of a community is really powerful. That holds people.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. So the context of where they are and where they feel at ease has a huge impact on whether they feel accepted and whether they feel liked, and that can shape them going forward, and valued.
Yeah, feeling valued. That was the word that came to me when you were saying that there. It's actually feeling that you brought value.
Exactly. Okay. So there's quite a few interesting things that you're doing. If I'm just listening to you, sharing all of these interesting stories, you've got, going out in nature, have these lovely ReWild projects, really paying attention to early years development. What are some, I know that's not the only types of therapy that you do. I know there's a few others as well. So can you share a little bit more on other and different types of therapies that you use in your practice?
Yeah. So I'm person-centered trained in my counselling, but something that I really wanted to bring to my practice developed because I knew that I was feeling the need to move on when I was training forest school leaders. And as I said earlier, these kind of conversations around the campfire showed that there was something in there that I wanted to move more into the therapeutic approach. So rather than training people and me assessing them and going, right, you're good enough, you pass this, I wanted to start working with people in nature, and for them to be the person that said, right, I've got to the point I've got to now, I feel better. So it was a different kind of dynamic there. So I was fortunate enough to go to the University of Cumbria and do an MA in outdoor experiential learning, which was just beautiful in the Lake District, and probably one of the most amazing experiences I've had in my entire life of education, being part of that. And a big chunk of that course was a module on working therapeutically in the outdoors. And I'm sure you've had these moments yourself, when you just feel like, here I am. This is it. This is where I need to be now. So that was wonderful to have that confirmation. So obviously I wasn't, although I've been working therapeutically for a long time outdoors, I wasn't qualified in that way. So I then went on and did a diploma in counselling, and I wanted to blend those two worlds together, really. So I use that work obviously in the ReWild Project and to coordinate and run that as well. But I also work as a counsellor myself. And some of the things that I do are to take that counselling outside. So walking, sitting with folks in a beautiful natural area to see what that brings. And I often think that nature becomes my co-counsellor. It's this silent other person that is there, that is holding that space, which changes the dynamic completely. But even when working indoors with people in the counselling room, we use a lot of nature language when we're describing our emotions because we are nature. So we talk about moods being stormy, feeling a cloud over us, our heads feeling foggy. And so I integrate a lot of that kind of language into helping people to explain things that they can't verbalize so well. So that it crosses through that completely. And also this idea of working with the whole body. So really thinking about where emotions sit in our body, rather than just trying to cognitively explain them, but sitting with that and having the space to do that. I think nature encourages us to pause. And so often life is frantic and busy and trying to resolve things as quickly as possible. And the power comes from the pause and the questions that come from the pause, rather than frantically trying to search for answers. And I think really that kind of dovetails quite nicely into the way that I found my own path too, in that just going with it, seeing what happens, being open to opportunities, has led me down to the path that sits right completely rightly within my whole body now.
Taking that pause, because you're right, it's almost like he's frantically searching for, I need to solve this, I need to feel better now. We need to find a solution instead of holding whatever is going on, being with yourself, and letting it unfold in a more restorative way, maybe. So in the way nature would. But something I really liked, what you said earlier, was just being in nature. And for you, it's almost like a co-counsellor holding that space. So it is therapeutic. It really could be therapeutic to just be in nature, right? So I know that you also do you still do clay field therapy? Or,
yes.
Yeah, can you tell us more about that?
A new skill that I've added to my portfolio, if you like, which is absolutely fantastic. It took me quite a while to understand how to work in this way, because person-centered and talking therapies is about that question, is about asking the next question, is about keeping that dynamic going. Whereas Clayfield is really looking at trauma-informed, the embodiment of that, and using the body to express that. So with a client, you're really sitting alongside them in Clayfield therapy to support them in their journey and encouraging them to just feel completely in their body what needs to happen. And interestingly enough, what does happen is looking at the early years and the formation of ideas and thoughts and feelings and balance within the body itself. So Clayfield is a really unique kind of sort of sits within the expressive arts field of therapies, and it is very powerful for people who have deep held trauma, where in a talking therapy situation, verbalizing that can re-traumatize. So this just allows that release without having to feel that you're telling that story again, and you're just allowing the body to do what it needs to do to deal with it and resolve that as well. And it can be really emotional and really fun, if I dare say that as well. Seeing people allowing their bodies to do what they need to do within the clay field, and the sudden realization of what's happening with them and the relief that comes from that is a real honor to be part of.
I'm really curious. So, can you share more practical? Do they play with clay, or is it a movement that they?
So the clay field is actually a large wooden box filled with clay, and we have warm water by the side of it as well. So it's very playful, wonderful material to work with, and the clay field becomes your world.
Oh, I see.
And a client may come with something that they want to deal with. There may be something, but the idea really is to just come openly and sit within that space and allow yourself to have that time to just let your body do whatever it needs to do. And the hands hold so much understanding. That's how we understand the world, through touch. It's such a powerful sense. And to be able to touch this clay, to make it beautiful and wet and warm, and it's very nurturing. It can hold you. You can shape it. You can take parts of it and throw it away if you want to. So it becomes a real expression of your world and the things that you need to deal with as well.
And what is the role of the counsellor? Just holding the space?
Yeah, holding the space and to encourage. So, really to dig deeper, literally, figuratively, to dig deeper into the clay, to really experience this, but also to try and make that space as much as anybody can make a safe space for somebody, to recognise when that level needs to drop down maybe a little bit, when things are becoming too activated, and just to help that. So it really is a sitting alongside and working with the client at that point.
So you've mentioned quite a few times now how important it is to work with the body. especially when we've experienced trauma. And perhaps there are some listeners out there who are not aware of that, or think that, therapy only includes a cognitive based, we need to talk about our problems. But you mentioned earlier, this could actually be re-traumatizing if we just talk about the things that happened to us. So can you share a little bit with our listeners why it's so important to work with the body when we've experienced trauma?
Yeah, and if you talk to people who have experienced trauma, they have found that reverbalizing and telling their story against somebody, because some people it's beneficial, but for others it doesn't work. It can re-traumatize. It can cause great distress to have to explain that again. Whereas we feel the emotion comes in the body first, and then we cognitively try and work out what's happening. So if you think about those responses like flight, fight, freeze, and fawn, they are physical things that we feel. And we have gut feelings, don't we? We so often ignore those because we live in a world that is set up to reflect and evaluate everything and to look back on things. Whereas dealing with what's happening in the body now can be very beneficial, particularly to those people who don't want to verbalize what actually happened to them again. Trauma is held in the body. Stress is held in the body. We talk in terms of anxiety, don't we, about the tight neck and the feeling shaky and the butterflies in the tummy. We feel all those things, but then we think we're going to resolve them by just talking about them. And actually what we need to do is to move the body, to experience that with the body and to find that release. There's also, things like yoga. If you are doing something that you just have to focus on controlling the body, that can cause great ease in an overstimulated mind as well. So just having to focus on something that you do with your body and not have to worry about trying to cognitively work out what's going on be beneficial as well.
Yes.
And that's also what happens when you're outdoors. If you are walking and trying to navigate a tricky pathway or steps up a rock, then actually you're just in your body. And so often we don't allow ourselves to be in our body all the time. All the time, thinking.
Yeah. So are you saying that trauma can be released in a non-official way as well? So you don't have to necessarily go to therapy, sit with someone, do some body work to release the trauma, but you can also, by just being in nature or moving your body in some way, it could also be beneficial, if I understand you correctly.
I think to seek help is always a good idea. And to seek help, and if it's not right for you, keep going. There are so many wonderful therapists out there. But the beauty about working within nature therapeutically is that if the space that's created by your therapist is just a room, then you can't go back into that room whenever you want to. But if you are out in nature, you can go back and visit that other therapist. So you can go back actually into that physical space where you felt held and safe, and you can do that at any point, and it doesn't have to cost you anything either, because therapy is expensive, and it's difficult for some people to get hold of. So I think that's another element to creating a different kind of space that could be accessible whenever that person needs it.
Yes, exactly. Or if someone doesn't have the finance, perhaps, to be able to just, it's free, it's accessible, like you said.
Yeah.
So
one of the clients that I was working with just said they'd never felt worse from being out in nature. And I think never felt worse. Exactly. Never felt worse for getting out.
Yeah, that's true. So I'm just thinking about the ReWild project that you ran, and how that being in nature was so beneficial. So are you still running this ReWild project? This is still something that people can become part of, or if someone maybe is perhaps interested, can you tell us more?
Yeah, we're in an interesting phase at the moment, in that we're in our 6th year of funding. So we had 3 years funding and then reapplied and got another 3 years, which is just fantastic. And the lottery have been a great partner to work with. They're very flexible, very creative, very interested in what we're doing. But the project will be coming to an end around April time in 2025 as that funding runs out. And what we're hoping to do is to start something similar here in Kirklees, because I've moved from the North Links area, so it's going to come with me, hopefully. And what we're hoping to do is to use all the wonderful lessons we've learned from working in North Links with ReWild and look at how we can develop something for the people of Kirklees in the future as well. So what would be absolutely wonderful, if I may ask, is that any of your folks listening that are interested in giving ideas, supporting us to get the bid together, then please get in contact. That would be great, because we're just in the formative stage of looking at that. And there are no guarantees with funding, but it worked. It really, really worked. And what we feel as well is that although it's coming to an end in North Links, wonderful relationships have been formed over those past 6 years. And people have found workshops, groups, other communities through ReWild, which will allow them to continue some of that work. So it feels like a little bit of a legacy to leave behind, and we're hoping to bring that to the Kirklees area as well.
Why not? Yes, and definitely if anyone's listening today and they want to reach out to you, Elly, how can they do that? How can they find you?
Is it possible to give an email out for that?
Yeah.
So
sure.
yeah, if contact me at rewildnorthlinks@gmail.com. That would be great. And they're just formative conversations, seeing where we can go with it in this area. But we have, good evidence that it worked really well and has left a legacy behind in North Links. So let's see what happens in the future.
Exciting. So we'll also put your email address in the description, so you can also find it there. All right, Elly, thank you so much. So just to end off, what are some of the main takeaways that you want our audience and our listeners to take with them today?
Yeah, the key thing for me is that we need to make sure that we are caring for the carers. Yeah. And I think that's a real gap. So we need to make sure that health coaches themselves have somewhere to go, and they would be the ideal people who come to something like ReWild. Yeah. It's not necessarily for the clients they're working with, it's for people who hold that safe space for the people. So teachers, NHS staff, social workers, any public service worker, anybody whose job involves holding other people and keeping them safe. We need to make sure that there is a non-threatening space for them where they don't feel that they've got to overshare, they don't feel they've got to explain themselves, but it's okay to be in a space where you can say, I'm not feeling so good today. We need to support people who are feeling burnt out and stressed, and because we can't lose them. They're absolutely vital. Our teachers are wonderful, creative beings, and we need to make sure they can keep on doing what they're doing. So that would be my key message. And also get out in some trees.
Just go hug a tree.
Go and hug a tree right now.
Yes. And it's important, to care for the carers. It's interesting because that topic actually came up quite a few times in the last few episodes of the podcast, how important it is to have some level of support for health practitioners, for, like you said, the carers, the people that have an impact on the rest of society. And often they don't have anywhere to go. So I think that's such an important takeaway. And to, as a health coach, also to find a group or to find some form of support, or to come up with some creative ideas with Elly and in terms of how that can be done and how we can support ourselves in order to show up for our clients in a more resourced and maybe grounded state.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Elly. Thank you so much for your time. Really interesting work that you're doing, and I'm sure that our listeners will find your perspective both very inspiring but also thought-provoking. So thanks for taking out this time, and good luck with all the projects.
No, you're very kind. Thank you, Zena. Thank you for your time today.
If you have a passion for health and wellness, and you would like to make a difference in the lives of others and discover a new rewarding career in health and well-being coaching, visit www.healthcoachesacademy.com to find out more.